to do that.
Yeah, I was hoping Jim was going to come tonight, but or he may come later. I don't know. Anyways, go ahead. Should be recording.
Okay, everybody can hear me good? All right. So, I've been just as a short introduction, I've been doing contracting with various different people and firms for about the last 4 years. Pretty much all of them Perl in some capacity, but almost always, if it's a longer term contract, it bleeds into something else because every programming shop out there just can't stick to one language. Um, the sort of two sections I'll try to stick to here to make it a useful talk is how to get clients and get people noticing you so they want to hire you, and then what to do when you've actually got clients on the hook, that kind of stuff, and the differences between individual and small clients and big corporate clients, things like that, with regard to working as a contractor. So uh, first off, I'd say if you're looking for something that is very similar to corporate work, that almost all of us, I'm sure, are very familiar with, working for a salary, things like that. The good news is getting hired and noticed is roughly the same procedure as for normal employment. You need to get yourself somehow in contact with somebody in management, and you need to make sure that your resume gets in front of their eyeballs. There's sort of two different types of jobs that corporate firms actually want you to do if you're a contractor rather than a full-time employee. And the first one is going to be something that's so far out of their wheelhouse that they just don't feel like they want to invest in acquiring the relevant expertise. Uh, for Pearl, usually that's not going to be the kind of job you want from a point of view of how much money it's going to make you, because they're not really necessarily familiar with the Pearl market or how much Pearl programmers cost, things like that. Usually, what you're going to want instead is the other type of job corporate gives you. That's going to be basically software archaeologist, which is they've got an existing Perl thing that they need some help on, and their organization is just failing to get things together for whatever reason. Which, by whatever reason, I usually mean that their team is underperforming, and a lot of it times it has to do with some kind of control fraud on some level, in that people are saying things are happening when they're not. And the fact that you're an outsider allows you to actually see things that people just can't see because they're inside of the corporate structure. And those sorts of things are very, very, very commonplace. And since you don't have any kind of fear of being fired, anything like that, it's very straightforward for you to actually make a big impact for these firms, despite the fact that you're at a severe knowledge disadvantage versus the people who are actually there. Your only real advantage is the ability to actually see clearly for those sorts of projects. Now, the other bad news about getting hired at corporate is uh, for a lot of corporate jobs, like I said, you need a way in to a manager. And a lot of times, what they want is more than you as an individual can provide. So it's very helpful for you to have contacts at a contracting house or with a good recruiter, because they almost always want a big team if it's going to be a big project that pays well. A lot of times they aren't going to trust somebody that is just off the street to come in and turn around a team, until you start to develop a reputation for actually doing that, which thank God I'm actually getting to that point of turning around teams and things like that. That's a very useful skill to have. And uh, I'll tell you about useful skills later. But the when you're getting your cutting your teeth, you probably should talk to one of the people who do a lot of Perl contracting out there. There's, I think, about two contracting houses I know of. I've worked personally with Curtis Poe and his outfit before. They're good people. I recommend, if you want to, give them a shout. Uh, but once you get enough experience and enough things that you can market, as I've worked with this company, I've worked with this company, they're all happy with me. Here's their contact information. You can call them, whatever you want to do. Then things get significantly easier. So uh, the first 2 years probably of your contracting is going to be that kind of collaborative effort where you're working with other people until you can start to get enough reputation that you can actually start to just drop in by yourself. And a good way to do that is not necessarily even working with corporate clients. So the alternative to that is working with small clients, working with People who are mostly going to be things like webmasters who have got a Perl stack and they've been doing Perl and have tons of clients for years. There's also a lot of academic projects that use Perl. There's also a number of small firms that use Perl. There's one down here in Houston that's like literally 5 miles down the road from where I live that I think they're like a book reseller, and I've done a little bit of work for them. But the big point working with them is it's a lot like the corporate, but zero BS. As soon as you talk to them and you prove to them you actually know Perl and you know what you're doing, it's almost always just a question of well, how much do we charge? And that's a much more complicated subject that I'll get into a little bit later. Um, Now, aside from like all this talking about how you talk to clients, well, how do you get your name in front of them in the first place? That's another big problem, right? Personal connections can go a long way, and having a firm that works for you or recruiters, those go a long way. But I mean, first you have to be seen by recruiters a lot these days, and that's going to be I mean, you're going to have to be on some kind of aggregator, which in common parlance, that's LinkedIn. But it's not necessarily that. A lot of times, if you want to be seen by these smaller clients, they're not going to use a recruiter. They're actually going to be just searching on the web for somebody who has a project that is relevant to their needs. And they're going to say, oh, this guy's the maintainer of this CPAN module. I use this a lot. I want to do this and use this in some kind of innovative way for my business. So why don't I call that guy? And so you need to make sure that all of your materials on, for example, CPAN or any of your various open source work has good ways of actually contacting you and actually reaching out to you so that they can decide to do business with you or not. I've had several cold calls just from my GitHub profile. There's a neat trick you can do with your GitHub profile where if you make a repository with the same name as your username, it will show right there on the front whatever you want to in a readme.md. I can in fact show you here real quick. Uh, let's go to, here we go. And I will share my screen in Firefox. So for example, instead of seeing a default GitHub profile, you basically just see a big old CV and all the different little things that you want to talk to and various other clients. And then you see your normal stuff you'd see on a GitHub profile. So it's those little kind of helpful things that you can use that end up ultimately becoming the bottom of your marketing funnel. And that's really what it comes down to is you have to build a marketing funnel to actually get all these clients. And the top of the funnel is going to be aggregators. It's LinkedIn, it's Twitter, it's Facebook. Those are the three ones that you're going to care about. And then intermediate parts in the funnel is almost always going to be your blog or something like that that's trying to make sure that you stay relevant in those aggregators because you have to have constant content coming out to those if you're ever going to show up in any searches that people make for, I want to do X. You always have to have something relevant and fresh. Otherwise, your name is going to be at the bottom of the list instead of at the top of the list. So a lot of your work as you start out contracting is going to be this unpaid labor of basically being a content creator for probably about 6 or so months until it's pretty obvious that you're starting to get a lot of bites on your profiles. And probably the best place to get a lot of information about how to do that kind of stuff. It's a very common thing people have to do. There's a website called Stacking the Bricks that has a lot of very practical advice for doing that sort of thing. And as to books that I read that were very helpful to me with regard to knowing how to market a site in general, sales, all that kind of stuff, I'd recommend two books. That would be number one, The Secret of Selling Anything by Harry Brown. And then number two, Customers for Life by Carl Sewell. It's the latter one that is going to be the one that is going to make your reputation as a business person because managing the expectations of your customers ultimately is more important necessarily than how good of a programmer you are. It helps to be good, but it helps. It's a lot better to make sure that you don't break the spell with regard to what you're actually selling to the customer as a contractor. I'll send links whenever I'm done talking with regard to the recommended books. Yes. Thank you, chat. Anyways, the um, where was I? Please hold. Okay, so anyways, yeah, as I mentioned, it took me about 6 months of doing these sort of online marketing things, which are fairly well understood now. And then I had enough clients for me to be busy, pretty much to the point of way too busy. And so that's where you need to ask the more important question about like, well, actually, it matters how much I charge and how much is enough. So this is like the most common question I always get from people whenever they're thinking about doing contracting is how much should I charge? Because a lot of times they're thinking that, well, it's going to be more intermittent work, things like that. So they think that maybe I should charge a little higher than what I'm doing. But a more helpful approach is actually for you to think about, well, what do I need to pull in every month? And how much work do I think I can get this month? That's a more productive line of thinking with regard to how much you need to charge. And if the number turns out to be very high, that means that you need to be looking for particular types of jobs. And by that, I mean you need to focus on what are you really, really, really good at. Uh, it's far from unheard of in this business to get like lawyer rates. We're talking 300, 500 an hours for something that is very much in your wheelhouse that you are very, very good at. That would be for me, for example, it's going to be things like doing scraping and doing code archaeology kind of work because it's reading code and doing a lot of web automation. And the other thing that I do is a lot of conversion of old things from CGI to PSGI. There's so many things that you just get very good at over time. And those are the kind of places where you can provide significant savings to customers by just charging higher rates and getting it done faster. Um, Now, a lot of times when you're working with a big corporate client, they're going to want to do a lot of hours. And that means that you can usually actually get away with charging less as long as it gets you your 10,000 or whatever goal you have a month. Like, for example, I wanted $10,000 a month coming in from work for this contracting stuff because it's like 2 months and I've got my yearly expenses covered because I'm a frugal guy. So, uh, that makes it to where even if work is fairly intermittent, I'm not really too stressed out about it. But your mileage is going to vary. You're going to need to choose your goals appropriately. And if it turns out that you need to be firing on all cylinders 24 hours a day and no break ever, uh, it's going to be very hard for you to start cold. You'll probably want to actually start grabbing some clients and fishing while you still have a job on a salary or something like that that's going to be very stable. This isn't to say that you can't, as a contractor, have a fairly stable job. For example, I was doing a contract with Booking for the last 2 years. So those things can run on and on and on and on. And I suspect if I wanted it to continue, it would have simply continued some more. I've simply got other goals right now. So the other thing that I would say is your rates also can be used flexibly to try and get clients. A lot of times when you're starting out, you're going to want to do introductory rates because they're less than sold on the notion of your ability to solve the problem. And that's fine. If you have nothing else coming in, something beats nothing, right? So feel free to charge, say, what you used to make at your old job from a point of view of if you translate that into hourly, that's fine too. It's a good discount to give people, and then you don't really worry about it from a point of view of if it's steady work. Uh, Eventually, you'll want to tell them no, you need to charge my full rate, and if they don't want to pay the full rate, what you need to do is just need to deprioritize their work. I mean, because obviously you can either get better paying work, or you can find better paying work, and that's going to be higher priority than sticking with a client that is just not going to be able to pay you what you want to be paid. Uh, Now, as to just generally why it is you might actually want to do this. Really, the contracting life is not for everyone. Uh, like I mentioned, I have very low expenses. I have a very flexible kind of lifestyle. I don't have a lot of things requiring me to have a lot of expenses and a lot of obligations. It's very helpful for you to have a flexible life and home kind of arrangement so that you can, for example, work with clients that are not in your time zone. You'll a lot of times, like for example, if you're working with Europeans, you're going to need to wake up early. A lot of times, be working late at night, something like that, that's just not going to work with whatever your lifestyle is. So, the more flexible you're going to be, in general, the more successful you're going to be able to actually do this and land clients. Okay. Aside from that, I would say the only thing I've really got is stuff like a Batman origin story, but I don't think I'll bore you with that. Instead, I'll let Brett take it where he wants to.
Batman. I guess you're up, Brett.
Okay. Well, I think I'm going to stay off camera. I've been on the camera a lot today. And I got kids running around. So you get my voice. Um, I guess, I don't, let's see where to start. So my whole decision to go, I guess, independent started like many years ago. I was at cPanel for 11 years, and probably 4 years before I ended up leaving, I decided that that was going to be the last, person ever, or not person, but last company I ever worked for. And so I slowly made adjustments to get where, I was getting some side income. So I guess for lack of a better term, I was in search of that side hustle. And about 12 years ago, I had already started a website wanting to do that, hoping that it would basically pay all the bills, and it actually never did, and it doesn't. But I get a decent residual income from it that can buy me a few beers a month and pays for itself. But it's the website that basically it scrapes sales data from eBay for Boy Scout patches, and I sell memberships to people for, like, I don't know, it's like $5 a year, or maybe it's up to $8 a year now. But that was not something that ever is, even though I've got a bunch of members, that didn't become this golden goose that I was hoping to have. And so I was in search of wanting to do something, and uh, a good thing that a good piece of advice that I can add on top of George's is, keeping in touch with people you've worked with in the past. I mean, all of us have had careers that are spanning at least 1 or 2 decades or more. And mine is, about at the 20 plus year mark. And back in the 2000s, I had actually started working. I was working for a lot of government and university entities, and I was, excuse me. I told y'all I'm going. Sorry. In any case, so I had collaborations in the early 2000s in university and government that were still kind of doing their thing, but they had gone independent. And one of the gentlemen that I worked with, he was an independent contractor working with hurricane storm surge, using this storm surge model that I had worked with early on in my career. And shortly after the Hurricane Katrina, which happened in 2005, just where I was at LSU and working with this model, I was able to get onto a project with the university where it was we basically created a storm surge forecast. It's like weather forecast, but for storms. Whenever a hurricane was coming, we would fire it up and then automatically run this model, and then it would predict where the flooding would be near shore whenever the water was getting pushed up by the hurricane. In any case, in the intervening time between I guess say 2010 and 2018, he had gone independent, and he had started the project we started with was still going on, except it was going on with him as a private contractor, and he had actually reaped the benefits as a private contractor, getting these government contracts. And so I contacted him probably about 2018, and I'd kept in touch with him, but over the years, but every time I would, get in touch with him, I'd ask him if he needed any help. And the system was written largely in Perl and Bash shell, and so it was, that's what I was still doing and interested in. And finally, about 2018, he was needing help because he was getting on more contracts. And so I guess the point there, and I still work with him today. He's still one of my best clients. We were business partners on different ventures, and he's become a really good friend of mine through this whole process. But none of that would have happened had I not just kind of kept up with my contacts and past collaborations. So I wanted to emphasize, if there's something that you've worked on in the past, specifically, I guess in the government situation or academic situation, or with somebody who had a small venture and they weren't necessarily tied to a big company, and because of the IP restrictions and whatnot, then that could potentially be a way for you to kickstart an independent career. And it was for me. And the way it was in my case was, starting in 2018, I picked up some subcontracts through him, and my involvement in the projects were getting more and more up until, so I've been out of cPanel for like a year. Actually, it was a year on August 5th. And really the impetus for me finally getting up the nerve to put in my resignation letter at cPanel was that he had scored a big contract, and I was going to be getting like 75% of my salary, or at least I committed myself to enough hours in the project to where I was getting the equivalent of about 75% of my salary at cPanel. And it was just a good time to quit. I had been working remote because of COVID for, I guess, a couple of years, and I was just, I was ready to move on. And so I put in my notice at cPanel, and then like 3 days before my last day at cPanel, he calls me up and he's like, "Hey man, I got some bad news. So-and-so pulled the contract on us." And so I was like, well, I'm not going back to cPanel, so I'm just going to have to figure this out. Now, fortunately, I had saved up quite a bit of money. I also try to live pretty simply. My situation is that I'm a divorced dad. I've got my kids every other weekend and several times during the week, basically 50%. And so I'm, as domestically, as much as that is hard on me and the kids and the family and all that, I'm sure everybody's familiar. Some people are familiar with that. As much as that sucks, it does afford me days and nights where I can focus on projects. So I can work late at night. I can, work with clients that are at different time zones and have different needs in that way. So I don't recommend getting divorced just so you can have that flexibility, but one of the silver linings in my situation is that. But to go back to the collaboration aspect, I was also, so when that contract got pulled, I wasn't at a total loss because I had through that gotten other contracts. Like, for example, when I got directly with LSU and one of their groups there, who was it was a group that I collaborated with on the project originally back in the early 2000s. And so it just helped to have that. It helped to have that, soft landing. So even though I got that contract pulled, I was still able to pay rent. I was still able to, put food on the table, do things, for the kids. And so a lot of it was not planned. A lot of it was just luck. And but what really brought me, I guess what provided the opportunity for that luck to present itself was I maintained old contacts, especially ones who with people who were I trusted, who were, that I worked well with, but also that had the flexibility with their intellectual property uh, to be able to kind of, you weren't necessarily tied to any kind of corporate IP, I guess. And so that was just helpful. The other part was just wanting being hopeful, wanting to be able to go out on my own and just make it happen. And I know you can't really quantify a positive attitude, but whatever you need to do to foster and develop a positive attitude, that will help you. And it helps you not just by like giving you some kind of like hopium to, just like crossing your fingers and hoping that it works out, but it gives you, I found that it gave me at least the some foresight and some awareness of setting things up, being a little more open to talk to people about networking, and even reaching back and thinking about people who I hadn't talked to, like not you may think, well, I used to have good collaborations or good contacts with people, and I just haven't talked to them in a couple of decades. Well, reach out to them, because that's what I did. And even if it may not have resulted in a direct job, it helped me hone my skills. It put me in touch with somebody else. Now I'll tell you where I get my work now. The work that I do with the hurricane stuff is now just a part of the work. The other work that I do, I tend to work really well with very small companies who use Perl either internally to manage their business workflow. One company I work for, it's a translation company. So they translate written text, and they basically have a pool of freelance translators. But what they do is they have this application that I guess it was developed a decade ago, where they manage the work internally. So they manage their quotes, their projects, and then they invoice their freelance translators. And they even have a linguist portal that's kind of built up, and that's one of the main things I'm working on. But that started off as a Fiverr gig, and so I a few years ago, I was looking for a place to get just like gigs. And so that was one of the first gigs I got on Fiverr, was just doing this very simple thing in Perl for this the small business owner, and it turned into a really good fit. And so I work for him. I got another client. I've gotten like 3 or 4 clients off of Fiverr, and it all tends to start off as a small gig. And that's kind of like how I was thinking that I wanted to do just like high volume, small job kind of stuff. But what ended up happening was I was actually doing more homework for kids than I was getting actual legitimate work. But the legitimate work I did get, I would say 80% of those jobs turn into service contracts. And so what I try to do from there is get a contract of no more than 15 hours per client. Because me personally, and this is another bit of advice, you need to figure out if you want to work just a lot of hours for one person or one outfit, or do you want to have like a variety of work? For me personally, I prefer to have no more, say between 15 and 20 hours of work per client per month. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I get kind of bored if I'm working on the same stuff. Number two, I like working with smaller clients, and they tend to not have like a very well curated backlog or know exactly what they want you to do. So it reduces the burden on them to give you the work. And so if you can just say, well, you've got 30 days to do, say, 15 hours of work for somebody, that is usually that is usually not a burden on them to tell you what they need you to do. It gives you and them opportunity to communicate and not have to communicate urgently. So it's just a nice, even, like, easygoing kind of pace. And so that's what I like to do, is have multiple clients, about 15 hours of work per client. And then I don't know, I haven't actually sat down and added up how many actual hours I've got per month in contracts. But I mean, if I had to guess, it's pushing 60 hours a month. And my goal is, I probably should reevaluate this. So see, I'm not a good businessman, but I always told myself that I don't want to be on the hook for any more than 80 hours a month. And like where George has a good metric. His metric is $10,000 of income. My metric is 80 hours. My goal is to get 80 hours of actual billable work. And so I also tend to waste a lot of time. And if I were to, be on the hook contractually for more than 80 hours of actual billable, demonstrable work a month, it would be really, I think it would be a really big burden on me. And I would end up missing deliverables and stuff like that. So knowing yourself, how you like to work, and how you want to bill. Like, in other words, what do you yourself consider billable work? For me, I'll sit there, some days I'll sit there and I'll be piddling or having to do, like, I mean, we all know what it's like to you just can't get started, or you're just doing all of this like non-work just to get to where you can start. Sometimes I'll be doing that for 8 hours and I'll pull out 2 hours of billable work. And now maybe I could get away with billing the client 4 hours, but if I were to defend the amount of work I got done for the client in that day, I would not be able to, I only bill for what I feel like I could honestly defend. And so, to the client. And so that has also, I think, helped me, because A, I don't overwhelm myself, but B, the clients, they might not see that directly that you're doing that, but they feel like they're getting a tremendous value. And that also goes back to what George mentioned about managing expectations and managing, like, kind of keeping that magic. I think he called it, with the client, where they realize, and this is really important with smaller clients, I've found, they realize that you value their time and you value your own time, and that you value their success. And so a lot of times I will say, if a client wants to do something and I feel like it's not in my wheelhouse, like, say, for example, somebody wants me to do a lot of JavaScript. I mean, I can do JavaScript, and I tell them, I was like, well, I'm going to get back to this in a second about being focused, George mentioned being focused on one particular thing. I don't claim anywhere that I can do JavaScript, but I just say I do Perl. Well, once you got a client and they're like, can you do this? Can you do that? I mean, it's kind of hard to say no. But if a client comes to me and says, I know you can do some JavaScript, but I've got this like really super heavy JavaScript thing that I need to do, can you do it? I am always honest with them. It's only happened like once or twice. Both times I was honest. I said, I could do that, but it's going to be a tremendous amount of my time, like, learning on your dime. You're going to be getting paid. I mean, I'm going to be getting paid, to sit there and just figure stuff out. So if we need to find somebody to do JavaScript, or if we want to, like, figure out something where it's more, I'm able to use my time more efficiently and therefore your dollars more efficiently, then let's do that. And 9 times out of 10, they'll refocus onto stuff where the my need to do discovery or learn on their dime is minimized. And so, 1 second. Okay, hopefully my mic was off. So the last thing I will say is that I bill myself as I sell myself as Perl only, even though I will and can do other things. I usually don't like to do them, and a lot of it has to do with I either don't like doing them, like JavaScript, or in the case of these smaller clients, they're going to end up paying me a lot of money for just learning, which I've done plenty of that in my day. I don't mind learning on somebody's dime, but at this point in my career and with these clients, that's not beneficial for either one of us. And so I've always, and you can, I guess, a good number of you have worked with me at cPanel. Y'all know that I was always just like very Perl focused. And that has helped me. Now, I didn't back in the day when I was Perl focused, it was just because I really liked Perl and I didn't have any real interest in learning other things, or Perl was like that hammer and everything else was a nail. But as I started transitioning over to client focused work, that has helped me, because not all things, I am still like, a little Padawan in Perl compared to a lot of people. And certainly certain areas of Perl, not there's a lot of areas of Perl that I don't know or that I'm very much green on. But the parts of it where a client just needs to get their application working, or they need to add a feature and it's interacting with a database, all of that, none of that is a question for me. I may waffle on, okay, what's the best way to do it, but I don't ever have to sit there and figure out, okay, how am I going to connect to the database and iterate over these records, and then how do I display the HTML? So I'm able to just focus on what probably 99% of the clients I have need, which is web application based, or munging data, reading a file, that sort of thing. So I do definitely encourage, if you've got like a specialty or an interest, whether it's Perl, if it's SQL, if it's web automation, what have you, being able to focus on that and use your programming skills to facilitate that. And I think George likes to say use programming as the superpower to do other things. I think that really well sums it up as far as creating a niche for yourself. Because if you're, I don't know, I find if somebody's billing themselves as I know all of these languages, it's not necessarily of it makes you look like a jack of all trades but master of none, but you're really just competing with more people. And so if you can like narrow down what it is you do as a specialty, you end up becoming more of that bigger fish in the little, the increasingly shrinking pond.
Yeah.
So
I'll mention one thing. If you do a lot of polyglot programming, the way to market that is as, like I was saying, software archaeologist. You have to make that clear that the reason you do many programming languages is because you're very good at reading code.
right, and I'm done also. So feel free, George, to take it away, or
Yeah, I think it's
Jules,
time for questions.
Julian, if you had any questions.
Yeah. So we're just open the floor to questions to either George or Brett.
And I do want to point out, Zachy and Will are on here. I believe that they are self-employed as well. And if there are others who are also similarly self-employed or have the so-called side hustle that they have gotten into and are growing, then I would love to hear advice if other people have it.
Yeah, if I'm going to leave you with anything, it's just sort of that it's actually really good news how uh it doesn't really take like a humongous amount of skill. If you're capable of even being like a junior Perl programmer, I think you can even make it as a contractor. It's not necessarily anything that you're going to feel like, no, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. No, you can make it. You absolutely can make it. And all the projects you're going to work on, if you've been in corporate, things like that, you're going to be like, wait, this is the standard? Hey, this is going to be great. This is easy.
Well, one of the questions in the 80s and 90s, I've been programming for god awful amount of time. I did contracting, but I wasn't a contractor in a general sense. I worked for one company. I mean, you mentioned it as a corporate client. So I worked for one company 40 to 60 to 80 hours a week, but I would bill. And I would typically go two different ways. I could bill the corporate and wait like net 120 on my invoices. You say net 30, they might deliver it by net 90. It's usually net 120, which you got to keep that in mind. So you have to have a pipeline of work in there. Also, I did go through organization. So I would be a W-2 to an organization that then billed the company, in which I would get a steady paycheck. But with the rules now, I don't know how that's affected. So George, do you submit net 30 and get net 120s, or how do you
So
do
it just depends on the client. Yes, corporate is going to be very much longer time frames because they know they can get away with it. It's going to be net 45s almost always as a starting point, but yeah, net 90s and even net 120s are possible for you to end up having, especially depending on how risky they perceive the project to be, in what the time frame they expect to actually be working on it. If it's going to be a longer term project, they're always going to try and drag out the payment terms as long as they possibly can. For example, I believe booking itself was a net 90. And, the other thing is, like you mentioned, W-2s. It is very helpful for you to have your own LLC or some kind of corporate structure so that if they actually do want to be dealing with an entity that does W-2s, things like that, that it's possible for you to issue those for payment. It's very helpful also to be part of a partnership if you can find a good partner, because that means that, especially under Texas law, you don't have to pay franchise taxes. And there's a number of other good benefits you can extract from that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I was just gonna say I am incorporated also, and so like the net stuff, that's like within how many days you get paid. Is that what that
Yeah,
is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can tell, like, most of my clients pay me pretty quickly, which is nice. And I'm
yeah,
even
with
even like,
individuals, almost always they'll pay your invoice within a week or so.
yeah, and so that's been super nice. I do have one client, they kind of, payment is probably 45 days, 45 to 60 days.
Yeah, I
So
generally try to stick to net 30s if at all possible, but depending on the client, I'll go as high as net 90s.
um and then related to that is I use FreshBooks. I don't know how you, George, you're a lot more sophisticated with the accounting, but I use FreshBooks that allows me to track my hours, projects, and then do invoicing. I don't do payments directly through them. I have different payment arrangements, but with each client, but it helps me out a lot being able to track my hours like that.
Yeah, I generally use a system called Ledger for doing the accounting with all that stuff, and then for invoices, I just have an invoice template that I make for each client and just alter it as necessary whenever I make invoices. And other than that, I just have a good accountant.
I'm surprised you didn't like use QuickBooks. I mean, that's pretty popular out there.
I mean, a lot of the point of things like QuickBooks and those sorts of things is just to make life easier when tax season comes. But I've always done my own taxes, and it's not really that hard or that different for writing up K-1s, doing those things in the LLC tax returns. I'm sure if I have more complicated business arrangements that are not just pulling in money from clients, for example, I'm probably going to be buying more shares in a certain business that is not programming related soon, and I'll probably need to be talking to my accountant a lot more. But uh, I'd probably be using things like QuickBooks at that point or in fact just hiring a bookkeeper, because I mean it's going to take a lot of time at that point.
I'm kind of, or consulting is very much outside of my area of expertise, but on the billing thing, in case it ever be useful to anybody on the thing, a million years ago, I worked for the state of Texas, actually one of the universities, and found out from the other side that if you're working for a government entity and you give them a discount based on when it gets paid, they have to take the discount by Texas state law. So we had people giving us like a 2% discount to require net 30. And the
Yeah.
state didn't pay anything else on time, but that one got paid.
Yeah,
That's
my accountant
interesting.
actually told me about that trick whenever I was working with one of the local education service centers. That was great.
Good
That's
to
a
know
good-
it still
good tip.
exists.
I'm gonna write that one down.
Yeah, that sounds very valuable.
Well, it's like I mentioned, a lot of times you'll want to do things like introductory rates or give a little bit of a discount just so that you can get the kind of terms you want on the contract.
Yes,
Um,
I agree. I've done that too.
Joshua had a question in the chat there for a little bit. His question is, what is the most common type of project you both receive from your clients, and what modules and problem spaces are most common in your circle?
Okay,
I do.
sure.
Oh, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I'd say from a point of view of the kind of project that I get most often, due to my expertise being mostly going to be SQL, web programming, and web automation, it's going to be those three things. I'd say the most common job I get is convert an old CGI application into PSGI, put it behind something like Squid or whatever, and make it a normal proxying app. It's just modernization of existing web applications. It's fairly straightforward sorts of stuff to do, but usually you then get sucked into fixing a number of other existing bugs and get to bill more and more hours. Yay.
And I concur. I've a lot of what I do is just web applications, CGI. In fact, I advertise my services as somebody who doesn't mind maintaining legacy. I will modernize if they ask, but usually they're just trying to get a feature added or some kind of weird problem fixed. And along with that, I deal with quite a bit of old legacy CGI. You notice a lot of things that you want to fix, or that's not best practice, or it's just straight up security issues. And my it takes discipline, but just noting them down, letting the client know about them, and then moving on. It keeps you focused on what they're asking you to do, and that makes them happy. But it also generates a list of work that if there's a lull, that you can always go back to, or maybe they'll review, and they may want to have you do it. One example is I have a client who wants to implement two-factor authentication. Well, I noted some time ago that they were storing their passwords in plain text on their and I was like, well, we need to fix this before we do two-factor authentication, because it really doesn't matter if they could, you've got this glaring hole. So what that did was they really wanted to do the two-factor authentication. So I was able to get the approval to hash their passwords and do all of that first. And it wasn't a ton of work, but it also wasn't, it was about half the work for that month for them. And so, that helps you just keeping track of those sort of things helps you just being able, and that can apply in any case, whether you're modernizing or it doesn't even have to be web application. I've done a lot. I do a lot of like data, what's the word? Like aggregation kind of things. Like they just needed this one thing done, but I wish I had kind of kept them as a client because they were good clients, but it was a dog food company they specialize in selling like fresh dog, like freshly made dog food or something. And so they were getting in these orders and they needed to combine all of the orders coming in from their web system into a way that would allow them to more efficiently package the food and stuff. And so I worked with them for a couple of months doing that. And that wasn't web-based at all. They were just, I had to ingest the CSV file and then just manipulate the data and give them basically the work schedule that they were looking for. So I'm trying to think what else.
Building a dovecot, always fun.
Yeah. Where's another one I'm trying to think of?
In the meantime,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, one of the more surprising things that I've had to do repeatedly for clients, like you mentioned, I've had to implement TOTP, two-factor auth, multiple times at this point. The other thing that I've had to do multiple times that is somewhat surprising is due to a key omission in the documentation that Google puts out with regard to how seeking videos online actually works. It turns out in the documentation on how to actually implement that, there is an off by one error, and it has been sitting in the documentation there for nearly a decade. And so, as such, pretty much every implementation on the face of the earth gets it wrong that doesn't test this. And there are a couple of certain Perl web frameworks that get this wrong as well. So I've had to fix that for a number of clients at this point.
Is there any other questions for the gentleman?
Did that answer your question, Josh? I think a lot of it's going to be typical, I think, web stuff.
Yeah, the most complicated problems I've found are always going to be help, I need you to build me a templated rendering pipeline. And I'm like, you can't just use something like vue.js. And they're like, what's that? So
well, yeah, just a lack of knowledge thing. So you're just providing knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best kind of consulting. I'm conning them and insulting them, right?
How often do you guys get asked for? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sir.
How often do you guys get asked for completely new work rather than fixing legacy stuff or patching legacy stuff?
I'd say that's probably going to be about between a third and a half of the work I ask for is they want me to build some new system from scratch. And usually it's it's less than from scratch. It's more like I'm going to be gluing together a bunch of stuff that already exists because they don't even know where to start is a lot of the problems with clients. They don't even know what they don't know, and so you sort of walk them through what all's required to get what they want done. And while you're doing that, it's the typical kind of process that you'll find even in corporate when you're dealing with trying to work with product owners, project managers, whatever, what have you, where, they don't really know what they want until they have a little bit of something in front of them. So you're trying to deliver prototypes as fast as you can that deliver sort of what they want until they figure out what they actually want.
What about I'm gonna turn it around. What is there anybody here that has some experience doing side work or setting, having their own client base that they want to share or comment on?
Yeah, well, mine was, like I said, in the 80s and 90s, and they're all long gone. But I have been interested in switching because, I'm close to retirement age, but I really don't want to retire. I want to keep working. So I expect my main employer to push me out at some point. And so what can I do to stay from going stir crazy? So I probably want to pick up some more work.
Yeah, and certainly that's one thing you're going to see if you start doing contracting seriously. You're going to eventually get enough work that you're going to have to tell clients, no, I don't have time.
Right.
Like for me, Brett was mentioning he works like 80 hours a week. I try not to. I try to work 40 hours a week. I try to keep
No,
office hours. I'm really bad at that.
that's
But
Yeah.
George, that's a month, 80 hours a month.
80 hours a month. So,
Billable,
yeah.
billable hours a month.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just saying I've done multiple 60 and 80-hour weeks, and I'm not a happy camper when I do that.
Well, I did that in the 80s and 90s because I was back in Silicon Valley, and they expect you to do 60 hours, but they really want you to do 80. Of course, they allowed me to bill for every dang hour, and I liked that, but I got burned out. And
Hey, yeah, man. Hey, if I can get 80 hours at California rates, I'm absolutely billing for 80 hours.
oh yeah, I took a 6-month vacation and learned how to fly, that type of thing. So
Yeah, definitely. If I could get a full 6 months of 80-hour work from at 300 an hour, absolutely. I'm not working for the next 3 years.
it wasn't quite that much, but yeah. California in the 80s is not California now.
Yeah, I can recommend California clients from that perspective, and that they will pay top dollar because they're used to doing that. But I will also recommend against it because the state of California will eventually attempt to hound you because they believe you've made money in their state.
Yeah, that's that you kind of got like a minefield back to the billing stuff to deal with. And even though you're present here in Texas, you are crossing state lines. So I don't know. That seems kind of scary right there.
It just depends on where the entity that they have that's paying you is. So if you want to make that less troublesome, you make sure that it goes through escrow in a third party state that is not necessarily going to be sharing its data with the taxing authorities of California. And then you don't have a problem.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. And we may have to have a talk about that, if anybody does, because a lot of high tech work is going to come out of California. Now I know where Will is up in Austin. There's a bunch up there too, but
Yeah, if you need advice on tax avoidance, I can tell you about an accountant that he's got good experience in that. So,
oh, okay. Thank you.
I
but yeah,
did that back in like the early 2000s. I had a side business that was making web pages and repairing and building computers, which was a very different business back
Yeah.
then than it is now. It's way more complicated. All of that is now and requires quite a bit more than one person. But I did do that, and I was at one point I made a guy that had a kennel, a website showing all of his dogs and a bunch of content and all of that. And that word got out, and next thing you know, I had a lot of kennel websites to make. I was the kennel website guy.
Hey,
And then
that's a way to
catteries
get your
too.
name out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came to a point where, and I already had wife and children and young children, and came to a point where I had to make that tough decision about whether I was
Yeah.
going to continue my full-time job. And luckily, I continued my full-time job because the market completely has changed, and I'm not so sure I would have continued to do as well.
yeah,
But
it's
that's
important
into
to
that marketing. One of the key principles in marketing right there is exactly that. I didn't even have to advertise at that point. They were advertising for me.
Yeah, your clients are going to be the best source of new clients every single time. They always are, because they're going to say, "Oh, this guy's great. He did this for me, and we're in the same business. So let me give you his card, whatever." Yeah. Uh, Certainly, and the whole point about not taking on more clients than you can, that's key to the whole expectation management. Unless you're making enough money that you can hire somebody that you know is going to be able to do the work too, just don't take on the kind of work you know you're not going to have time to do. It's as simple as that.
Cool. Unless there's something else, I want to thank you, gentlemen, both Brett and George. These were awesome presentations. I will have today's, it's not quite, we're not done yet, so we can chat about other things, but probably by tomorrow, I'll have this up on YouTube. I will post it everywhere. So everywhere I normally do. So anyway, that's awesome.
Thank you. I think it would be great to have that recording.
Yeah. Because there's a lot of tidbits that you didn't think about now that, oh, what did George say or Brett say? Yeah, I'll get the YouTube up there. And I'm also going to include some of George's links there from Amazon and other things.
Yeah, and I wrote an article version of my speech that has a little bit more background and things like that, you know, including said Batman origin story.
Yeah, Batman.
Yeah, thanks you guys a lot. You're really putting yourself at risk by putting this out there to the world, right?
Not so much.
Yeah,
Actually,
you might
this
create
is
more competition for yourself.
Oh,
no. This is actually really great marketing if you actually want to get down to it.
Yes.
I do want to point in closing. I wanted to point something out that I don't know. I don't know if George has ever tried to hit something big and, you know, get a lottery ticket kind of project or thing. I have, and it hasn't. I mean, it's not been hugely successful, although it does sustain itself. But I think that at least my takeaway from this experience is just doing the basic, you know, client relationship, expectation management, and just doing a good job and giving a good value to your clients. I think over time, that is, at least for me, has been the winning strategy, instead of trying to get something to go viral or create the next big app or something like that. I think that, you know, I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just that kind of, it's like winning the lottery in some respects. So sticking to the basics, I have found is good.
Well, certainly that's sort of my next plan, is to actually try and build a software business here. But I can say that if you can't actually handle like normal clients and customers and this B2B stuff, you sure as heck ain't going to be able to sell a product to them, you know?
That's absolutely true.
you know what? You have to be personable or something, George? Goodness gracious.
Yeah, it kind of helps.
Well, it also helps to have that basis, that client basis, so that you have the free time to work on your projects, that, you know, multiple projects, that any one of them could become big, or become a, you know, successful SaaS, or, you know,
Well,
something.
and a lot of
So,
times you get your best ideas from working with your clients.
yeah, that's true.
Mhm. I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like working at cPanel. A lot of us, you know, we saw a good plugin idea every other day. You know, we were just too busy with our job.
Yeah, that pesky work thing. Golly. So, Darren, how's it been doing for you? I mean, have you been able to get some interviews or anything?
Oh, I've been getting a number of interviews, but none of them turned into offers.
Sorry,
Think-
man.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I know I'm very capable of doing a lot of stuff, but due to the larger situation with all the mass layoffs, there's a huge amount of competition, and I think others are probably selling themselves better than I am.
Yeah, that's one thing I can give advice on with regard to like resumes and getting seen by more people. You generally want to try and tailor resumes. It helps for it to be kind of modular to build your resume so that you can mix and match little bits, because when you get as skilled as we are, you've got a lot of different things that you've done over time. And everybody filters these things by keywords and stuff like that. So a lot of times you'll want to sort of laser craft the the resume towards whoever you're sending it to, so it's more likely to get noticed. Other than that,
Yeah, I have been doing that to an extent. I think lots of people are saying the resume is impressive, but then like later on when there's like you move on to interviews and stuff, and then they decide to go with somebody else. Or quite often or quite often it's like the resume looks impressive, but you look more like this kind of person and we want this kind of person.
Yeah, that's normal. You're going to get a lot of mismatches with regard to expectations. A lot of times they don't necessarily want a very highly skilled programmer. They want somebody that they can, raise up to be a company man, and uh, a lot of times for people who are really skilled, that's just not going to work out. You'd need one of those other two types of jobs that I mentioned that corporate is willing to hire for. So,
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I'm quite accommodating, but it's like, and to stick around with places. But although what maybe it's just mostly unspoken, but there is just the odd case where it's like a recruiter was not going to put me forward, or they checked because they knew that they wanted a junior level person that they could like control.
yeah, that's a very common thing. I mean, you have to understand that corporate, especially very independent programmers who know their worth, do make them nervous to a degree. It's just a thing, and you have to sort of deal with that and make sure that that expectation, which is yet another one, is just managed. That especially if they feel like you're going to be the kind of person who is just a hired gun, don't be ashamed about saying, yeah, I'm just a hired gun. I don't really have any particular loyalty to this place, but I'm a hard worker. I know what I'm doing and I'm a professional, and I'm not going to let it get in the way of us doing great things together.
Yeah, I think generally the main problem I've had, like I've been getting a decent amount of attention in interviews, but from what I can tell from feedback or otherwise, it seems one of my main problems is being able to explain my past work or history, where like if they're trying to like figure out, am I going to fit in the team, or it's like, have I done these particular like non-technical interperson, like they often want to know like how I get along with other people, and often like tell stories, like tell me about a time when, and it's like I don't remember most of these details.
Yeah, spinning yards, like that kind of stuff is always one of those things that when you do enough interviews, you're going to figure out that there's patterns in this, and you just you figure out a good story, and you just tell the same story over and over again, even if you make it up. Who cares? I mean, we've all had these interactions and with other people in workplaces enough that you alter the names to protect the guilty, and you
Yeah.
just make a entertaining yarn, and that's all there is to it.
See, I think if I had known in advance I might get laid off, I might have made a point of like making notes for a while about, okay, this happened and this happened. And I know some of my coworkers did that. They were savvy, but I think I was just assuming that I was at my forever company. So I
Well, you'll
wasn't
find
making
you'll
those
find that
kind of
once you start
preparations.
you'll find that once you start thinking about those questions and just letting them ruminate in your mind, the situations that you've had that match those criteria are going to they're going to come forth to you eventually, and you can just write down a good story about it. You just have to dwell on it long enough, and it'll come to you.
I guess
I,
part of
I
the
found
challenge is telling something that's truthful and it focuses on what I did rather than what the team did, and it covers the points that they wanted.
Well, it's memory, so it's as truthful as you remember it, man.
Interesting.
Hey,
yeah, a
Darren,
good
you're in
start,
Texas, right?
Darren, might be just to go back and list some of the interesting projects you've worked on. That's a lot easier to remember than the cool story.
Oh
Then
yeah.
That's
once you have
true.
the list, it's like, oh, I remember we did some real cool stuff there.
Yeah, I
Unfortunately, I've
mean,
normally done that in an interview, which is the worst place in the world to do it.
Yeah,
yeah, sometimes
especially.
it can never. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially the sort of since I did like a decade doing QA, a lot of my stories are one of those things that's like, yeah, this software was screwed up in this particular way, and it was awesome. They don't like hearing that.
Yeah, I know. I was part of the challenge. Well, part of the challenge thinking up stories is lately I spent a lot of time doing basically paying tech debt and stuff rather than working on client features, and so it was harder to point to things that sound interesting, or it's like, yeah, we did this thing for the client and this thing for the client, and it's like, how do you explain like you spent a lot of time like doing security fixes or getting dependencies up to date or refactoring or whatever? It's like, now I
I
realize some
saved the
clients like this,
company
but
15% year over year, or I fixed these security bugs that we never had to deal with ever again. You can make the story. You just got to figure out how you want it to sound.
Yeah, and my son has been saying that you need to attach numbers like percentages. Darren, you said 15%. Just
Yeah,
pull the number out of your butt.
out of your
You know,
behind.
makes it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of those though you can look back on and say, something that's really useful for dealing with numbers. You can normally get an idea of how many hours of your developer's time you saved. That's money saved.
Yeah.
Just
I can,
multiply it by an hourly rate.
yeah, I can give you an example of one of the stories I use is about optimization, because that's almost always one of those points that it's obvious where you made a huge impact for the customer and you saved them a gigantic amount of money. Back at cPanel, they had a backup system that was trying to
That's the
keep
one that
incremental
I
backups.
wrote
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you helped me with.
Yeah, we had this incremental backup system, and it was taking something like what was it 30 minutes to do a backup checkpoint, something like that. And I believe we sped it up something like 10,000 times.
Yeah,
Those are the kind of
you did
numbers
a
they
good
like to
job.
hear, is those sorts of things. And we reduced the file size of the database from like 3 gigs per client to something like 36K per client. So, we did a really good job there. And those are the sort of things that they like to hear about. Another one story I have was we had a Postgres query that was 3 pages long and
Oh my.
took 30 minutes to run, and I got that sucker down to 2 seconds. So those are the sort of stories they want to hear about. And this was a multi-petabyte database. So
Wow.
I actually did have a story like that, which I remembered and told. In this case, it was a PHP application using Drupal, and it was producing a report, which included some user data. And so it's like, it was bringing like tens of thousands of records. And it was basically, before it was like doing multiple database queries for each record. And I changed it so it did 2 queries total. And that made a page which was like, in some cases it was running out of a 1 gigabyte memory limit and crashing, or it was otherwise taking several minutes, and then it ran a couple seconds after. So I pointed to that, and that is actually something I'm proud of as far as client impact, making clients happy. But that being said, now maybe the impact is different depending who I talk to. But in one case, when I used the story, I got feedback later that said that example was too low level. Like, they figured that sounded like more like a junior level thing, and it's like they wanted something that was like bigger impact, considering that I was more of a higher level thing person.
So yeah, when they're wanting to hire senior level programmers, most of the time they're wanting to see that you had the ability to organizationally pull off some project and manage a few programmers under you, and all those sorts of things. That's going to be very different from the sort of startup small programmer. I did something really cool technically and personally built a product that sold $1 million in units. I mean, I've done that, but that's less impressive to a lot of these people apparently than being able to cat herd an entire team of programmers to get some stuff done. So my story about that is actually we at Booking, we had a team of, I think it was about 4 guys, other contractors from various places all over Europe. They had basically been spinning their wheels for about 2 years trying to get a system to replace the existing contract management system they had. They just didn't understand the problem, and the direction from management was unclear. And so I had to basically go in, lay down the law, and figure out, what management actually wanted, which was basically repeated phone calls because nobody wanted to take responsibility for jack and squat. And so it's all like personal initiative stuff. You just have to just ram it down, ram it down, ram it down until you finally get enough people to say, no, we actually want this, we want this, we want this, and get the requirements that you need and ramrod the whole thing through and get it done. There's just so many situations where, like I've mentioned, if you read the article, it's there is control fraud and all kinds of other weird things going on in organizations that prevent them from actually accomplishing anything. And when you're a contractor or somebody who they want to see is a senior programmer, they want to see that you're able to get things done despite how dysfunctional their organization may or may not be.
Well, how dysfunctional the other guys are. Of course, we don't have that problem.
Oh yeah, of course. We're great people. We would never have such problems. But I do want to know if you happen to know how.
By the way, having the recordings of this video is good, but George, with your initial talk or whatever, I think you were going off notes or something.
So I was I've posted in the chat a article version of the things I talked about.
Okay, good, because I think it'd be great for me for applying or whatever, like to have this stuff in writing.
Yeah.
I will include the notes that he's got, plus a couple of books he was talking about. I'll have it up on the YouTube in the notes section. So it'll all be available.
Yeah, my last words of advice is don't forget to ask your clients for blurbs and recommendations so that you can put it on your marketing material.
Yeah, that probably is great.
Agreed.
right.
Years ago, I took a course on networking, not as in, like TCP/IP, but in human networking. And one of the things that I'd stuck out with me over the years, I've kind of gotten out of the practice, is that when somebody has provided me with some great resource, such as a job or someone who got me a job, is you handwrite them on stationery, a thank you note, and send it to them. I mean, through the snail mail. It used to be, and the reason why it was told to me is because the elder George Bush, the president, not the one that was governor, the other one, that was one of the things he did, and it was one of his success stories.
Certainly
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the personal touch makes a big difference, especially with regard to recruiters. Every time I've had a recruiter get me a gig, I've made sure to send them something to
Good,
show my
good.
appreciation because I want them to continue pulling in business for me.
Yes. So I'm glad that you're doing that without me having to tell you. I just remember that from that course I took. So.
Yeah, the key thing to getting a lot of clients or anything working in general is you need to make sure the incentives of the people that are pulling for you line up with yours, and a lot of times just a simple thank you note and maybe a few bucks will make a big difference.
Yeah, get them a gift card at a place they like to use, maybe at a Walmart if nothing else, but probably a bar if they go to a nice bar, buy them a few drinks on a gift card.
Well, thankfully for recruiters, tips are not unlawful, so you can just send them $100 bill if you feel like it.
Oh goodness, okay.
That actually reminds me of like networking amongst independent contractors and doing referrals and stuff like that. I know like George and I have referred before, and if if you find like you've got something that's just not in your wheelhouse or too much to do, or frankly the other person's just playing better at it and and you want to give the client the best opportunity for success, referring to people that who are also doing it also is helpful. And you can show appreciation to people who give you business just the same. But I would definitely encourage that. And even if you're just doing side work or whatever, if you're open for doing something, let us know. If you see something that maybe we might be interested in helping with, let us know also. And I think if we kind of develop a networking amongst ourselves in the Perl community in that way, the amount of independent contractors would be able to grow and be sustainable.
Yeah, that's one thing that I can say is very helpful. If it turns out you have too much work to do, it's still very helpful to clients if you tell them, well, I don't have time to do this, but I do know who does, and go and refer them to somebody you know. That's a very helpful thing. Oh, what else was I thinking? No, that's it.
Brett, is that, you started a Perl Guild or something like that up on GitHub. Has anything happened with that?
No, my intention there is really just to have tools and documentation for that might be helpful. And in particular, so the thing we had that a couple of months ago now. We had that the meeting where we went over WX Perl, building native looking apps on Windows. And that's kind of where it started was, I just wanted to create a place that provided some good information that would help support Perl contractors who were doing, contracting, yes, but also if they were interested in doing things like creating Windows clients or, clients on operating systems where people are used to paying money for things. And I think the obvious one there is Windows. And so I have since learned of some other, at least one other way to build WX Perl on Windows, and I need to get back to it. But that's ultimately the point of that whole thing was just to have like the information, documentation, and tools that people can use to build at least initially native Windows applications that they can then sell either as standalone client-based software, or as, and this is probably where I would most use it, as a native Windows client for a software service, either through API or maybe like a hybrid thing where some stuff can be done on their local machine, but the proprietary stuff needs to be done via web API. And so one of the projects that I'm working on with one of my partners is that we have a web service that's servicing a pretty niche area of domain science, and we want to be able to have this platform that is a software as a service platform. But one challenge that we have is the files that we're dealing with can potentially be ginormous, like many gigabytes. And so the solution, and most of the people who would be using it run Windows. And so the obvious solution would be to have a native client that is able to extract whatever data over our APIs. We would do the proprietary stuff over there, get the results back, and then apply it locally. And so that's kind of the model. That's one of the models that we're looking at facilitating. And so,
Yep.
and my specialty is Perl, so I want to use Perl for that. And the other guy is his specialty really is Fortran, but he's also a long-time Perl guy. And so Perl is kind of like what we want to use for that. And that really has that's why I think I'm honing in on it. But ultimately, whatever I figure out, I'm going to document in the guild organization. And if there's some scripts or some tooling that will help in creating the applications and bundling them in some way, that guild would be a target for that also.
Yeah, I think that Joshua's question in particular is of great relevance to that sort of group with regard to things that we're seeing repeatedly for clients. Writing, say, an article about simple implementation of Toppy probably would be a good thing to put up there, because if 2 people have seen it, a third's gonna.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and even I've run into just once, but I suspect that it's fairly common, especially for small clients who at some point in their history had created a member-based website or an internal workflow-based CGI script, that their passwords are probably not even encrypted.
Yeah. Well, there's those ancient CGI scripts that emailed you whatever the form submitted. They're still around.
Well,
Amazing.
I think that right now the worst security problem that I'm seeing repeatedly is thanks to Amazon, because RDS will not actually share PG Shadow with people. And so if you're using PG Pool, you have to put your passwords in plain text inside of the user list.txt for PG Pool and or for PG Bouncer. So Amazon is personally liable for probably a lot of breaches right now as a result of that.
Oh my goodness.
Julian, you reminded me of a gig, an interesting gig I made on Fiverr. I did on Fiverr that actually has turned into like a residual, some kind of residual income. This guy needed I forgot what host he was on, but they were basically revoking access to use the systems. It was a shared hosting situation, and they were using one of these old CGI scripts, mail form mailers,
Yeah.
and they were taking away the ability for these scripts to use just the local SMTP. And so they contacted me to figure out what to do. And the solution we came up with was I basically wrote a Perl utility that accepted the mail input just like SendMail did, but then it would use like email simple, one of the Perl modules that Ricardo has created, Fastmail guy has created to deal with sending emails using SMTP. And so
Yeah, but you'd go over like 567 or what is it, 485, one of those other ports.
Exactly. And so basically I just created a work-alike for SendMail. And then what this guy ended up doing was, well, he paid me very fairly. And then he sends me like $10 a month or something because he uses it for other clients. I'm like, okay, that's cool. I wasn't expecting that, but it's appreciated nonetheless. And so the whole idea of these, but that also points out the whole idea of these scripts that I was actually pretty surprised to see find how many people use these very ancient Perl there's shopping carts, there's form mailers, there's all other things that these people will buy off of these websites. I didn't even know people sold these things, but they'll buy
people are making absolutely bananas amounts of money with a software stack that is just total garbage.
Yeah, and so people buy them off of these websites, drop them in their CGI bin. They don't work, they don't get the support they need, and then they'll come places like Fiverr. So like there's an opportunity and need for people to support that garbage, but also there's a market for things that you can just drop into a shared hosting environment that do things you could probably do them pretty securely. So
yeah, it's stuff like cPanel plugins, you name it. There's a huge market for
Yep.
that kind of stuff. One thing I can say is that when you're like converting legacy CGI apps, a pattern I've seen repeatedly is whenever things go wrong in the application because it's not perfectly written, a lot of times what people do is they'll feed in a dump of whatever the request was into a CGI directly. And if you go to any kind of PSGI or modern framework, you're going to need some kind of shim so that you can accommodate that workflow to where it works the same kind of thing of I'm sending in a request body on standard into a CGI script.
That is really strange. I had never thought it just never would have occurred to me to do that.
Oh yeah, all kinds of wild and woolly practices out there.
One thing I can also point out in that area is that recently there's a CPAN. What's his name? Book. Dan Book, maybe. Anyway, he's a core developer, but Perl developer, but he also has a lot of cool modules on CPAN. One of them is I think it's called CGI Tiny. And if you have to do CGI, I highly recommend, and you're able to either start from scratch or you need to write a CGI script, but also you're not able to go to PSGI or something. I highly recommend taking a look at that module. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and if you're actually going to PSGI, CGI emulate PSGI is the thing you want.
Is that a module called CGI to emulate PSGI?
It's
What,
CGI emulate PSGI.
okay, that makes more
So
sense.
it makes a CGI script act like it's a PSGI script.
Okay. Link it. Someone said link it.
Yeah, I will. keep it in.
Meta CPAN.
I'm watching out for you guys in terms of making sure you link all the things you mentioned.
I'll find a CGI tiny. And I'll-
CGI Tiny I've heard of because my previous employer, we did old fashioned CGI a lot.
Yeah, Dan Book. Dan. He does a lot of stuff. He does a lot of stuff with this Distazilla also.
Somebody told me about the market. Why are so many programmers getting laid off?
Oh, that one's simple. Go take a look at the 10-month chart of ODL on the St. Louis Fed website, other deposit liabilities. We've been going into pretty serious inflation for the last 8 months. I mean, deflation. Sorry.
When at the conference, I was shocked to find out. I talked to well, it's just one guy, former Zip Recruiter guy, but he told me like they had just let go, like I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks before, had let go a lot. I don't know. He said 200 people. I don't know if it was all Perl programmers, but it was a lot of technical people that they let go.
Yeah, the other headwind Pearl's been facing is Booking decided that they didn't want to have any more contractors about midway last year. And they've also decided that they're going to go to Java and Node.js. And so they're not hiring a lot of Perl people anymore. I think about probably that means that it's going to be places like cPanel, Grant Street, and probably a few banks. They're going to be the major full-time Perl guys left.
I think Craigslist is still Pearl.
Craig hasn't hired a new Perl programmer in a decade.
Yeah,
Really?
I think George, you may have been the one to tell me this, that they're just a small group and they just
I think
Keep
it's been 16 employees for nearly a decade.
Oh, the entire company.
and they literally just keep it going on existing servers and
Yeah, they still use THTTPD. I happened to have lunch with one of the programmers one time. It was interesting. And speaking of talking to people in various places, I can tell you that it is absolutely 100% worth your money to go to the Perl conference if you happen to be a Perl contractor. I have found at least 3 good, reliable clients that I still have to this day at Perl conferences. So I'll see you next year in Vegas.
maybe hey Will, do you want to promote the third? Is Will still? Yeah, he is. We are planning a third track at the Perl conference in Las Vegas for science. It's not official, but we are working hard to make sure it is official. Where it's going to be paper based, like science paper based, publication based. It's going to be a third one in addition to Perl and Reiku. It's going to be pretty awesome. So I don't know. Will, I don't know if you want to do a pitch for it, but it's I'm pretty excited about it.
It's going to be great. It's focused on science-related things, which is a bit broad, but it can be anything from science and science-related, like chemistry, biology, math, medicine, and all that. Also, things that are a little more tangential, like high-performance computing, AI, and other things that may be related to scientific endeavors. And everyone who puts a talk into this track will also be putting forth a paper or poster in the academic style so that it can be gathered up and published at the end of the track. So this is currently being organized with Brett as the acting chairman of the Science Perl Committee. I'm very proud of him for that. I'm his assistant. And Zachy as well. So we are definitely planning to make that happen if possible.
And that
Awesome.
that what George mentioned, I also definitely agree with that. And hopefully, my reason of bringing this up, in addition to promoting it, early was to say it might open up a lot more opportunities for employment, and whether it's through government or institution or Pearl contracting. So hopefully bring some more and new and different folks to the Pearl conference.
I certainly saw a novel disproof of one of the interesting number theory conjectures today. I think that the novel approach might actually be interesting to demonstrate with Pearl. And I don't know, it feels like there's a couple of other conjectures that'll be disproven by this. So maybe I could find an interesting result. We'll see.
That would be great if you were interested enough to actually do that. We will be putting out the call for papers quite soon. It will be separate from the normal call for papers because it will require the actual writing of a paper. So it's a real call for paper.
Sounds right up my alley.
We're also planning on having some LaTeX templates.
LaTeX.
I still call it latex because then it makes me sound more like a degenerate.
LaTeX.
Oh,
Yes.
goodness.
Don't make me talk about employer workplace of choice.
Oh, don't get me started. I've been helping my accountant buddy with the strip club he bought.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
Don't forget, this is being recorded now.
Well, I'm gonna have to check out
Yeah,
once
it's
we
kind of
start going down.
in there, Will.
Yeah.
Purely technical support, I assure you.
Okay, sure it is.
Well, Julian, I may in the next couple of months, let's say within 3 months, I should have something to talk about, some additional OpenMP stuff, if interested.
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
keep
with your, yeah.
I'll keep
That
you
was- stuff
posted
was
on
cool.
that. I'll keep
Sure,
you
and
posted.
anybody who wants to present here is welcome. As long as it's Pearl related, I'm happy.
I am going to go ahead and check out, but I will say that anyone who wants to show back up again at 9:30 tonight, we will be having a recap of the Science Pearl, AI Pearl, and Pearl Types committees that met for several hours today. This is my 4th Pearl meeting, like 8 hours so far. So
Yeah, man.
keep it going.
I don't know how you do it. I had to take a break.
It's the power of Pearl compels me.
Do you have the you do it on Google Talk, right? G Talk, or
Google Meet.
Google Meet, that thing. Yeah. If you want,
All right.
I will most likely not be on there, but
That's fine. I'm just inviting anyone who wants to come.
No, I appreciate that.
Will the Chill Braswell, the hardest working man in Pearl.
Yes, that may be true, but it depends who you ask and what time of day. So, all right. Well, thank you guys. We'll catch up with y'all on the flip side. Bye.
take care.
Bye-bye. Yeah, unless something else is going on, I'm ready to close this up. This has been
It's been great,
talk,
guys.
Yeah, it's awesome. I learned a lot too. So
Yeah,
Thanks a lot, guys.
to anyone out there listening, if you need advice, anything like that, feel free to email me. My website's going to be linked at the bottom of the video, so go for it.
You bet. Okay.
All
Thank
right,
you, guys.
fellas. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.